What's up, everyone? I'm here with my NFL Week 3 DraftKings picks. As always, this would be where we would do our recap for the previous week, but I've actually already done a full in-depth Week 2 recap, and I did some lineup reviews. So if you want to check that out, be sure to check the link in the description below. I apologize for getting this video out a little late this week, but we're here nevertheless. So let's not waste any more time, and let's go ahead and get to this week's picks. All right, so our first stack on the week is going to be Kirk Cousins and Jordan Reed. Now, first off, we do need to know that Jordan Reed right now is listed day-to-day with a chest injury. I also heard he has some form of a toe injury. I'm not really sure how that happened either. That may have happened in practice or something, but regardless, that is something to keep tabs on. He didn't practice much early in the week, I don't think, or at least he was limited. But today, on Thursday, he did practice, so that's a good sign. Usually, if players don't practice on Friday, that's when I sound the alarm and kind of throw the red flag and get a little bit concerned. But if they practice in full on Friday, we can pretty much assume they're going to be, a full go on Sunday's game unless something unforeseen happens. Now, I also want to make sure it's pretty clear that Cousins is probably going to be pretty popular in cash games this week, and as he should be. I mean, right now, this game's total, last I looked, was at 55 even, so a massive total. And, I think it's really just a product of neither of these teams really have shown us much on a defensive side of the ball. And because of that, I think Cousins is actually a pretty good play. Now, I put Reed with him because I think Reed is actually the safest play to pair with Cousins, but I don't think you need to stack Cousins in cash games this week. In fact, I'm not really a big believer in forcing a stack in cash anyway. Now, in GPPs, you do need to stack. That's going to be, the way to get the most upside in your lineup. But in terms of cash games, you don't need to stack Cousins this week. I did it multiple times last year where I played Cousins alone, and it worked just fine. But Reed is probably the safest bet. He had 8 targets in week 1, 6 in week 2. The one big concern is only 1 red zone target so far this season. Which is obviously, like I said, a huge concern for me, especially when it comes to tight ends where, touchdowns are so important for tight ends production. But he still is top 5 in tight ends as far as workload so far in 2017. So he's still getting the looks, and probably a lot of it could probably be a product of just the Redskins not being in the red zone that often. I also wrote down here that is Pryor going to take some ownership? Now, this is a question mark, and right now I really don't think Pryor will take too much ownership from Jordan Reed in cash games. Like I said, I don't think Reed is a cash game player for me. He is definitely the safest of all of the Redskins, I think. There's another guy I'm going to talk about here in a second, but honestly, I think Pryor is definitely a pretty popular GPP play this week. I was on Pryor and Cousins last week. They really didn't do much. Week 1, they definitely were out of sync, so I'm going to play Pryor a little bit, but honestly, until I see a bigger workload and a more consistent production out of him, I'm not going to be playing him too much. I also wrote down here that Stafford is very comparable. So Matthew Stafford and Kirk Cousins are basically in the same exact spots here. I mean, they're both in relatively high total games as underdogs. Both defenses are going to be facing are not really that reliable. If I had to pick between the two right now, I'd probably go with Stafford just because I think it's going to be a little bit easier to stack him in this game if you want to. But honestly, like either one of these guys are great cash game plays. I suspect that these two guys would be the most popular cash game quarterbacks as they should be. But right now, if I had to build a lineup, I would go Stafford in cash and I would go Cousins in GPPs. All right, so next up, I have Cam Newton and Kelvin Benjamin as my second stack, and I try to be very transparent with you guys, letting you know that I am a Panthers fan, but I try to set my biases aside because ultimately I don't want my biases costing me money. So with that said, I'm not going to be playing either of these guys in cash games. I've had some people ask me about Kelvin Benjamin in cash. I have no interest in him. At 6,700, there's other guys slightly more expensive and other guys slightly less expensive that I have a lot more interest in and feel a lot more comfortable playing. So Kelvin Benjamin, absolutely not. Even without Greg Olsen. I feel like without Greg Olsen, people think that Kelvin's workload is just going to skyrocket, which I really don't think it will. I think he'll probably get a little bit more looks. He had 8 targets last week. I wrote down here red zone targets going up, possibly, but honestly, I think the biggest guy who's going to get the biggest workload increase is going to be Devin Funchess. Funchess is not a guy who gets a lot of targets and doesn't get a lot of receptions, but when he does, majority of them are going to be touchdowns. So that's obviously going to bode in his favor. I wrote down here in all caps that there's no Greg Olsen, so that's why I think Devin Funchess is going to be a big uptick. So as far as the red zone work, we could see it kind of dispersed evenly between Jonathan Stewart, McCaffrey, Kelvin Benjamin, and then Devin Funchess. You know, I definitely do not think that Ed Dickson is playable this week. A lot of people have been asking me about him as well. I have zero confidence in Ed Dickson. I'm not going to be playing him. And if I have to play Ed Dickson to win a GPP this week, then I'm not going to win because I am not going to play him. I have zero confidence in Ed Dickson whatsoever. Also, I wrote down here that the Saints have been the worst defense in the NFL so far, and really for the past few seasons, they've been borderline the worst in the NFL. I mean, you know, so far in 2017, they've allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks, wide receivers, and they're bottom 5 in the NFL against running backs and tight ends in terms of points. Now, if you're someone who thinks that's not a big enough sample size, we can take a look back at the last 2 seasons, and they're bottom 5 against every single position fantasy points-wise except tight end. And I've already talked about we're not going to be playing the tight end in this game. At least we shouldn't be. If you're playing Ed Dickson, then you're trying to be too cute. You're reaching for a player that really doesn't have much upside here. So I like Cam and Kelvin. They're pretty much going to be GPP only for me. But really the best play in this entire game is probably going to be Christian McCaffrey. I think he'll probably be the most popular as well. I really like him. But if you just want to go for a traditional QB wide receiver stack here, Cam to Kelvin is probably your best bet. All right, so next up I have Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams. And really this is just a product of whether or not Jordy Nelson is going to play. Even if Nelson does play, I think Adams is still a pretty good player to stack here with Rodgers. But if Nelson does not play, I suspect that Randall Cobb probably will be a little bit more popular, although Randall Cobb is dealing with a shoulder injury. I forgot to check today, to be honest. I'm not sure if he's practicing, but I'm sure he is. So I think Randall Cobb will be on the field. But even with that, I think Davante Adams is going to be a pretty good play. I don't know if I'm going to go this route in cash games or not. I think it is an okay cash play, especially if Nelson doesn't go. And honestly, even if Nelson does go, can we really be sure that he's going to be 100%? I mean, for a fact, we pretty much will know he won't be 100% if he does play. So honestly, I like Adams. I'm not going to go crazy with this. But and I'll probably have a little bit of Cobb as well, but I think I prefer Adams over Cobb in this situation. And, you know, I don't think the Bengals defense is awful. I think they've been put in a lot of bad situations so far this season because of how horrendous their offense is. But even with that said, I think this is still a really good spot to get both of these guys at, I don't want to say a low ownership, but probably less than last week for sure. And there's definitely some potential there for some big games here. Okay, so moving into our running backs now. First up, I have Le'Veon Bell. And first off, this is the cheapest we've seen Bell in a long time at $8,800. That alone is going to give me some interest. Now, there's quite a few different running backs on the slate here. I also want to toss in Jay Ajayi really quickly. I didn't put him on the screen and in the graphic, but him and Jay Ajayi are kind of the top 2 running backs on the board for me this week. You know, personally, I think this is the week that we see Le'Veon break out. You know, it's not the best matchup in the world. He's facing off against the Chicago Bears defense. Their front 7, really their defense as a whole, is kind of a funnel defense, so that leaves me a little bit to be concerned about. But, you know, honestly, he had 27 rushing attempts last week for only 87 yards. Not very efficient, but they were still going to him a lot. He had 4 targets, caught all 4 of them for 4 yards. So, I mean, 31 touches and only 13 fantasy points. You're not going to see that, you know, that minimum amount of production out of those large amount of touches out of Bell very often. And at 8,800, I think he's a guy you have to consider in cash. And I will tell you, Jay Ajayi is also in a good spot. And I believe he's 7,700. I don't have him pulled up quite yet right here in front of me. But at 7,700, Jay Ajayi is another interesting guy. In terms of workload, he's actually very similar to Le'Veon Bell. The one difference between him and Bell is Bell gets a lot more work in the passing game, whereas Jay Ajayi really isn't going to be utilized that way because they basically use Jarvis Landry as their short yardage passing down fiend. You know, he's the guy who's going to, you know, soak up all of those targets. So Ajayi is so high on my list for cash games this week because I think he's just a stone cold lock for a touchdown. You have to think if they're going to score 2 to 3 touchdowns this week, you have to assume that Jay Ajayi is likely going to score one of them. So I really think you need to play Le'Veon or Ajayi in cash this week. Now, there's some other very cheap options to go with, and you really don't necessarily have to go this route and pay up for one of these guys. But, you know, I think the safest bet is to go with Ajayi or Bell as your RB1 and kind of just figure it out from there. All right, so next up I have Ty Montgomery, and he was the workhorse that everybody went to last week. And so far this week, I'm not sure if he's going to be as popular. He probably will be. He should be. I mean, he's a great play again this week. But, you know, the one big concern that I have with Montgomery so far this week is that we just heard Mike McCarthy say that he is aware of how much Montgomery has been used. Right now, Montgomery has played more snaps than any other running back in the NFL so far this season. So, I don't think we're going to see a big dip in his workload, but we could see it scale back a little bit, especially if this game gets out of hand, which it's very possible it could. So really, I think Montgomery, even at 6,900 and with the threat of his workload being diminished, I still think he's too cheap, and I still think he's going to get enough workload, and I still think that the upside of him scoring a touchdown, if not two, again in this game is very high. So I'm going to play him again in cash games, and I'm just going to see what happens. I'm not really all that worried about it, honestly. And this guy should definitely be locked in as your RB1 or RB2 this week in cash. All right, so next up I have Theo Riddick, and I just cannot continue to stress it enough at how bad this Falcons defense is against a pass-catching running back. It is a very obvious flaw in their defensive scheme, and it will continue to be until they make large adjustments. And so far, we haven't seen them make any. And Theo Riddick is obviously the best pass-catching back in this game, especially for the Lions. Now, Amir Abdullah is serviceable in the backfield at catching passes, but it's pretty clear that the Lions prefer to use Riddick in this spot. Now, Riddick is an interesting cash game play. Right now, I'm leaning towards playing him in cash. I can definitely understand why you wouldn't. Amir Abdullah is definitely a little bit scary in that regard. Riddick really didn't get much workload at all until near the end of that game, where he was kind of just getting the garbage time carries. But Riddick, really, his value is not on the ground. It's through the air. And like I said, I suspect the Lions are probably going to be playing from behind for most of this game, hopefully. And if that definitely happens, that's going to bode well in Riddick's favor. If we know the Falcons struggle against pass-catching backs, you know the Lions do. So the Lions are definitely game planning with Riddick beside Matthew Stafford. This could be a good spot to stack Stafford and Riddick in cash games. One of my latest builds had that. So, I'm not scared to play Riddick in cash games. I definitely understand the concern with Amir Abdullah, but honestly, I think Riddick is a pretty safe bet. Right now, he's projected at like 12 points. I think, 12 points. Personally, I like the over on that. I think he's got a pretty higher probability for getting some targets in the red zone, actually. We've seen Riddick be one of the heavier targeted running backs in the red zone, actually, over the the span of the last 16 games or so. So I like Riddick in this spot, and he's definitely going to be a guy I'm going to be considering in cash. All right, so moving into our wide receivers now, I'm talking about Keenan Allen once again. A little bit of deja vu here because I talked about Montgomery and Allen last week, but honestly, they're in pretty good spots again. So first off, quick glance, if you look at Allen here, probably not in the best spot, you would think, right? He's going to be facing the Chiefs in a tough divisional game, and he's going to be facing off against a secondary for the Chiefs that, you would think is pretty respectable, right? But first off, they're going to be facing the Chiefs without Eric Berry. Unfortunately, he's out for the season with that Achilles injury. And also, I was thinking, okay, Marcus Peters probably going to match up against Allen. That's going to probably turn me off of him, but not the case. Marcus Peters lines up on the right side pretty much the entire game, right? He's not going to shadow a guy specifically. He's not a guy who's going to move to the left and the right and the slot and everywhere like that. So because of that, Keenan Allen gets a huge boost there. Number two is Keenan Allen lines up on the right side of the field only 12% of the time. So even if that happens, they're probably only going to be matched up a handful of plays this game. He also lines up in the slot 63% of the time, which means he's probably going to be facing Phillip Gaines quite a bit, the Chiefs slot corner, who right now is ranked 100th among 106 qualifiers for Pro Football Focus among cornerbacks. So honestly, this is a huge spot right here for Allen. His touchdown upside is not as good as you would like it to be for a high-end receiver like this because of how many red zone options the Chargers really have. And, both of their tight ends, Henry and Gates. Of course, they have Tyrell Williams, who actually is a pretty good red zone threat as well. Of course, Melvin Gordon. So there's quite a few other options out there for the Chargers in the red zone, which I think hurts Keenan Allen's upside in terms of GPP usage. But in terms of cash games usage, I think that he's another relatively good play here in cash, even at 7,200. Now, it really depends on how your lineup is going to be built. If you want to go all the way to the top and get Antonio Brown, that makes perfect sense for me. But if you have two very expensive running backs, you need to get a little bit more salary. Maybe Allen's kind of your balance off here a little bit. So, there's a lot of different ways you can go this week, but I think Allen definitely has to be in consideration once again. All right, so our next two guys I want to talk about, I want to throw them up on the screen here at the same time. It's Rashard Higgins and Jamison Crowder. So first off, let's talk about Higgins because he's kind of interesting. So first off, a couple weeks ago, this guy was on a practice squad, and now he's looking to be kind of chalky, believe it or not, in this spot. I mean, first off, last I looked, the Browns were road favorites. What? I would love to see a stat letting me know the last time the Browns were road favorites because I can't believe that. So, I mean, first off, Higgins is not currently designated as a starter, but, you know, I had one of my friends who is a Browns fan kind of point this out to me, and I've been reading about it as well. Kenny Britt just looks like he just does not care about football right now. He looks like he is completely just, you know, just out there just trying to collect a paycheck is all he's interested in. And Higgins actually played more snaps than Britt last week, so obviously the Browns, you know, coaching staff has taken notice of Kenny Britt there. So really, I have no interest in Kenny Britt this week. Also, right now, it looks like the tight ends are kind of getting split as far as snaps go for the Browns right now as well, so we can't really go there. So, and, you know, Corey Coleman, of course, who would be the #1 option here, has a broken hand. Ricardo Lewis, I really don't know too much about him. I know that there was some interest in him last season late, but honestly, I just don't know. So Higgins looks like he could be a little bit chalky in this situation, which kind of blows my mind. And then we have somebody like Jamison Crowder, who, if we heard that Jordan Reed was not going to play, Crowder probably would have been one of the more chalky wide receivers on the board. I'm curious to hear what both of you guys think. You know, for me, if I had the extra 900, I probably would go up to Crowder. I think Crowder is in a much higher total game. He's a little bit safer. We actually do know that even though he's a pretty tall, even though he's not a very tall guy and very small player, he's still going to get some looks in the red zone. Of course, Pryor scares me a little bit in that regard because he could start stealing some red zone looks. You know, and then you have guys like Ryan Grant and Josh Doxson, and like there's a lot of different red zone guys for him. Of course, Jordan Reed, if he does play, which it looks like he's going to. So, you know, but one upside thing with Crowder is he does return punts, so that we have a little bit of potential for a big play there. But I really wouldn't put too much equity into that. So honestly, you know, these two guys, either one of these guys is. I'm probably going to play one of these guys in cash. I don't know if I have enough confidence in either of them, but there's really not a ton of great value out there this week. So if you're going to go super cheap and you need the extra salary relief, Higgins is probably your best bet. If you want to go and spend a little bit more and feel a little bit more confident about it, Crowder is probably a decent play. I don't have a ton of confidence in Crowder either, though. So let me know. I'm very curious to hear what you guys think, but both of these guys are on my radar for cash. I like Crowder in GPPs for sure, especially if you're going to be stacking, you know, or triple stacking or something like that with Cousins. I probably don't think I'm going to stack too much of Higgins with Kaiser. I don't really have anywhere near enough confidence for that, but Higgins is definitely interesting in cash games, and he's actually a lot more popular than I thought he was going to be this week. All right, finishing up here with a couple of tight ends and a defense. My first tight end is Zach Ertz. Honestly, I think Zach Ertz is pretty much a lock to be a top 5 tight end this season, and you know, right now he probably could be a top 3. I only see Kelsey and Gronkowski probably being higher on the board than him right now. He's flirted with the 100-yard bonus in both of the first 2 games. Last week he was gifted that kind of like, I think it was like 50-something yard reception on a tip ball against the Chiefs, so we can't really count on that every week, but Ertz is definitely looking promising. First off, going up against the Giants here, if Janoris Jenkins plays, you have to assume that that's going to, you know, definitely be a big drop-off for Alshon Jeffrey, but in Jeffrey's loss, we gain it in Ertz. You know, secondary for the Giants definitely is, you know, definitely above average in my opinion, but really you have to assume that this Giants offense is just going to continue to put this Giants defense into bad situations. So honestly, I like Ertz. I think this could be a week where we're going to see a lot of guys try to pay down at tight end, and I really don't have much interest in doing that. I really want to play Ertz or Kelsey in cash this week. I feel like a lot of people are going to go all the way down and try to play guys like Eric Ebron or Jared Cook. And the next guy, you know, if you have to go cheap, the next guy for me is Jack Doyle. Once again, this is just a spot where I think that he is, you know, I don't think he's overpriced by any means, and he's certainly not a great steal here at 3,600, but he's definitely an option, okay? It was pretty clear that Jacoby Brissett liked to throw the ball to him. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, 8 targets, like 79 yards or so, about 10 yards of reception, nothing special. I don't know. Like, it really just depends on how you think this game is going to unfold. I don't have anywhere near enough confidence in him in cash, but if I absolutely have to go that route, if I have to get a sub 4K tight end this week, Jack Doyle is probably #1 on the list for me. You know, if we were playing on the other slate, this entire slate would be different if the Ravens game was included, because everybody would be on Buck Allen, everybody would be on, you know, Ben Watson, probably everybody would be on the Ravens defense too. So I mean, this entire slate just kind of got thrown for a loop because of this Jags game in London here. But with that said, I definitely think that both of these guys are options. Ertz is definitely a much better play, and Kelsey, if you can get there in cash, he's by far the best tight end play on the board in my opinion. But honestly, if you want to even go even a little bit higher and go to Gronkowski, I don't have much interest in going to Gronk. this week in anywhere but GPPs. But, you know, ultimately, like I said, if you have to go value here, Jack Doyle is probably the cheapest guy I would feel comfortable taking in cash games. I will have some exposure to him in GPPs, though. All right, finishing up here with the Panthers defense, and I've already been pretty blunt with my biases here towards them because I am a fan, but this is just a pure case of the Panthers defense being too cheap. I mean, honestly, the Panthers defense has looked really, really good so far this season. Of course, this Saints offense is definitely going to be the best offense they've faced so far, but honestly, like, who cares? At 2,600, they are definitely the cheapest defense on the board. I'm willing to play in cash if you want to go that route. I don't really think I need to play them in cash. There's other teams, but honestly, there's no really expensive defenses this week that I'm just dying to play. So I'm considering the Panthers in cash for their defense. You know, first off, what do we want in a defense, right? We want a defense that can apply pressure, because the pressure is the key to everything, because you're going to get points for sacks. Of course, you need pressure on the quarterback to force him into making mistakes and forcing him into throwing interceptions and turning the ball over. You know, and of course, if your team's getting sacks, and of course, there's always a chance for a strip sack or something along those lines, and a fumble recovery, return for a touchdown. There's so many different possibilities, but it all comes down to getting pressure. And honestly, last week against the Bills, if the Panthers were facing any other quarterback besides Tyrod Taylor, they likely would have had 4+ sacks. That's how often they were in the backfield. So honestly, I like the Panthers a lot in this spot. I think they're just too cheap. And, you know, it could be an interesting kind of correlation play here to stack, you know, one of the Panthers running backs with their defense. So if you wanted to go McCaffrey or Stewart, I've even seen some people flirt with the idea of going both. I don't know if I would go with a handcuff there, but you know, if you wanted to do that in GPPs, that would be a little bit interesting and have a nice correlation play there as well. So we've seen these Saints-Panthers games be very high scoring, but most of the time that's when it's in New Orleans. Usually when they're in Carolina, they're a lot lower in terms of you know, overall fantasy production. So I like the defense in this spot, and once again, I just can't say it enough. They're just too cheap at 2,600. All right, so that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave it a like. Also, be sure to subscribe if you have not already. I'll be uploading these videos every single week. Also, look out for my sleeper/value picks video on Friday. And one more thing, be sure to check out my Twitch channel down below. I'm thinking I'm going to live stream on Saturday sometime, and we can kind of make a group lineup or something. Don't hold me to that. Something may come up, but right now that's the plan. I'll be sure to upload a quick little like 5 or 10 second video letting you guys know on YouTube when I go live, so you can check it out there. So be sure to follow me down below as well. Anyway, I will talk to you guys in the next sleeper/value picks video, and I will see you then. Later.